We're excited to have you all here from other, as well as other elected officials and staff from various cities to learn about how your community are implementing MBK plans. NLC has been and will be continuing to be committed to supporting city leaders' efforts to improve equitable outcomes for boys and men of color throughout America. Starting 6 years ago, NLC began to research and provide support to local officials who were committed to improving outcomes for Black men and boys by leveraging a framework to help city leaders build and sustain their efforts. In collaboration with foundations and partners, we have launched we helped to launch Cities United, now a 501c3 that's dedicated to reducing violence and violence-related deaths among Black men and boys. Since 2015, as you guys know, we have supported cities who have decided to focus on improving equity for boys and men of color. We've continued to provide support for cities to develop and strengthen their men and boys of color MBK initiatives and to help adopt and implement legislative policies that have helped to further the goals that you have set, as well as the National League of Cities and other MBK initiatives. We are committed as an organization to supporting your city's leadership and municipal staff's effort to sustain this work beyond President Obama's administration in coordination with the White House, MBK Alliance, and other partners. I'd like to thank the President and the White House, because if it was not for them lifting these issues up around men and boys of color through my Brother's Keeper initiatives and other initiatives, and having the President's voice has really made a difference in how city leaders and you and staff have really worked to deal with this tough issue. The local elected officials have answered the call, and we now have a unique window and opportunity to really tackle systematic barriers that prevent boys and men of color from succeeding. So as you follow this webinar today, I want you to think about how you personally, as well as your organization, how do you include partners and other community leaders and organizations to help sustain the progress that we've made together as NLC and our MBK partners and city leaders, again, have made progress. But, we can't let the transition between a new administration stop our work and stop our commitment. NLC, I'm personally committed to this. I want to make sure that everybody gets the tools that they need. A special thanks to all our speakers and everyone that's joining this webinar today. The bottom line, we've started our work. We got to continue it. It doesn't stop because President Obama is not there voicing this. The real voices to me are those that are on this phone, that is on this webinar, and that can continue this work, because it is not just a theme. It is something that needs to be resolved and dealt with in America right now. And through the people and participants on this phone and with the elected and staff leaders in American cities, I know we can continue to make a dent and improve the lives of men and boys of color in America's cities. So with that, and I'm going to stop my preaching on this because I am very passionate about this. NLC is committed to this. I'm happy to introduce Michael Smith, Special Assistant to the President for My Brother's Keeper at the White House, to share his remarks and greetings. So I'll let you take it from here, Michael.
Clarence, thank you so much. Thank you for your leadership, for the way that National League of Cities has just stepped up from the very beginning. What the President did was a call to action. I hope, it's helped to spark a movement, helped to fuel a movement, but it's been folks like you that have been in the trenches, that are doing this hard work and have been committed with us every single step of the way. So thank you, and thank you for giving me an opportunity to share a few words on the call today. Let me also thank Timothy, and I don't think Leon is on with us today, but Leon You've got tremendous leadership at the National League of Cities and Timothy Evans and Leon Andrews and the great work that they're doing there. Frank from Mayor Barry's office and Council Member Kristen Zakos, thank you so much from Vice Mayor Wes Bellamy's office in Charlottesville for the work that you're doing. And I know we also have, what do we have on, from Louisville, Kentucky? We've got Rashad, so thank you for your work as well. I'm not going to be long. I just wanted to come on to say a couple different things. One, I want to reinforce what Clarence was talking about. This work continues after January 20th, and I want you to know that we've been working since we started to make sure that this was not going to be some press releases and some excitements and some events, but the work that we've done from federal policy, supporting the work on the ground in communities, bringing in private sector support, has been about strategic, systemic, long-term work that is going to change the game for boys and young men of color. So whether it's the MBK Task Force, which will continue into the next administration, the work of the communities and organizations like My Brother's Keeper Alliance and Bloomberg and the Executives Alliance and National League of Cities, who are going to continue to support the work of communities, you should know that this work will continue. Also, the President has said it time and time and time again. I hope folks were able to see the ESPN town hall that the President did, really highlighting the work of My Brother's Keeper, but he said it pretty clear that My Brother's Keeper is something that he is committed to for the rest of his life, and Broderick and I will both tell you this is something that he asks about frequently. He is making sure we are working hard, running through the tape so that you are supported and so that this work is set up for success in the long term. So you will continue to have a champion, you will continue to have a partner and supporter in President Obama, even after he no longer resides at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue. And you know, whether it was that ESPN town hall, he just did an interview with Essence Magazine and the First Lady, just time and time again, when people ask the President what he's going to do next, he usually says, we're going to sleep, and then we're going to keep doing work like My Brother's Keeper. So know that we're going to continue to be there to support the efforts that you're doing. I also wanted to make sure that you have seen some of the other recent moves. You know, as we're running through the tape, it's not just transition. We're continuing to push on our mentoring campaign and hopefully supporting your efforts on the ground. Mentor reports that there's been a doubling in the efforts to bring in mentors, so they've seen a doubling in signing up since we launched the In Real Life campaign with them, and POTUS did the video with Steph Curry. We just released a new one yesterday with Kevin Durant, and so we're continuing to drive towards that. We're continuing to focus on evidence-based approaches. We had a few hundred people here at the White House last Monday for the first ever My Brother's Keeper What Works showcase, where we were really showing off some of the most rigorous evidence-based interventions in the country that are helping boys and young men of color. We continue to do lots of different work on the ground in communities and supporting the efforts that are taking place there. And so, you know, just know that while you're working hard, we are continuing to work hard as well. So let me say thank you for everything that you're doing. I know you will be hearing soon from a group of outside organizations, including the My Brother's Keeper Alliance, who will have some plans on what they're thinking about for next steps for continuing to support this work. But until January 20th, know that you can count on me as a partner, and then I know that I'm going to look forward to some ways to continue to partner with everyone after January 20th as well. So let me turn it back over to you, Timothy, and thank you guys so much for hosting today's call.
Great. Thank you very much, Michael and Clarence, for really giving just the way to kind of just speak about the work that's happening and understanding that you all are not stopping, right? And we're going to continue this work on beyond the President's administration in a new form, but we're going to continue it on. So a couple of key notes that I just kind of want to make sure of. If you can, you'll notice that in your webinar toolbar, there's an option for you to send questions. So please go on ahead and start as you get through these, as we get through each city, if you can please send out your questions, and then we'll go through them and also be able to make sure we ask our speakers or our panelists the questions. And then we also we'll take questions at the end of the webinar, toward the end of the webinar, so that we can make sure that everybody is able to at least have there's a dedicated time for questions and answers. And then on top of that, just to let you know, the presentation will be available is actually currently available in the handout section of the toolbar, webinar toolbar. And we are recording this webinar, and it will be sent out to you all after the webinar concludes in the next day or two. And then on top of that, we'll send out the presentation. So thank you all again just for your leadership as well, Michael and President Obama, and also just thinking around the work that Clarence is doing here at the National League of Cities. So thank you all. So we're going to kind of dovetail into a different part just to help to understand the work that we're doing here at the National League of Cities, but then also to be able to think around how does that work connect to the broader MBK plan and MBK work. And so I'm Timothy Evans. I'm with the National League of Cities, and as you saw on the PowerPoint slide before, I am a senior associate for boys and men of color here at the National League of Cities. So one of the things I just kind of want to just really show is the importance of being able to understand how to reach each and every one of your MBK goals. And from the work that we've done at the National League of Cities around Black male achievement and boys and men of color work, we have been able to find that one, there's somewhat of a framework that is important to making sure that you're thinking about how to implement your boys and men of color plan, which can be policy, practices, and procedures, but then also thinking about how to sustain that work. And that's kind of what we're going to be able to talk about. You're going to be able to hear from the cities is the implementation specifically around policy and some of the practices that they have been able to take on. In some of our work across the nation, we've been able to do this kind of work over the past 6 years, over the past 3 to 4 years, to really help improve outcomes for boys and men of color. And so we look forward to being able to continue to show that. And then the other thing I just kind of want to note is that as we go over this well, we call it's a roadmap. As we go over the roadmap, one of the things I just kind of want to just highlight is that this is not about focusing on one milestone. This only works for one milestone or 3 of them or whichever may. It actually cuts across them all. And so as we think about how to implement the milestones, these are some critical things that we believe that are important from our own work to help improving outcomes for boys and men of color. So when we talk about a roadmap, one of the things that we believe is that there's a need to establish and just promote a shared vision. So what is the work within your city, and how is that connected? How are you connecting partners and participants around a common vision or a common idea to move forward? And so one of the things that I kind of think about in our work is that we, cities like city of Omaha, Nebraska, or either Fort Wayne, Indiana, and even Milwaukee, the city of Milwaukee, have created their own shared visions that has allowed them to be able to create really a structure for how they want to move forward. And so even as you think about the MBK work, how are you creating a shared vision for the people that's in that room, and even for your city as a whole, to really move forward outcomes for boys and men of color? And so understanding that a shared vision really helps to set the direction for the community and for your city. The next one is thinking about, this idea of how do you engage diverse stakeholders? Who's missing from the room? And I think this is something that commonly we all ask, but I think the caveat here that we want to also just mention in this space is understanding that it's not typically, you're not thinking about who's missing from, not just thinking about people who are typically missing from this room, but people outside of your normal conversations or your normal connections as it relates to boys and men of color, whether it has to do with people in philanthropy, people in the business community, even thinking about individuals who may be a part of partnering cities. So thinking about this work is almost like a comprehensive space is really important, and thinking about diverse stakeholders. And then when we think about this, as I kind of mentioned before, this comprehensive strategy, we want to think more than just when we talk about data outcomes, we talk about where we want to target our work. The work around crime prevention, education, employment are critical things to think through, but it's also thinking about housing, right? It's also thinking about transportation. How does transportation impact boys and men of color? It's also thinking about internet access, something that may not be on the forefront of everyone's mind about the impact of access to jobs, access to the internet to be able to access jobs, to be able to access educational opportunities. And then also thinking about social services as well, which may be more of a county role in a lot of cities. So we recognize that when we talk about a comprehensive strategy, it informs not just one black male or not just a certain sect, not just one part of boys and men of color, but then the whole part, holistic view. So the next thing is thinking about this idea of shared accountability and data and outcomes. And so how are you using data to really drive and leverage the conversations that you're having? One of the things that we'll talk about later on is just in the next slide is this understanding around how data can drive how data should be driving the conversation around this work. And so when the president first brought this initiative out, we were talking about the disparities that are facing boys and men of color across this nation. And I know that each of you can probably at least point to some data points that help to demonstrate that. I think the other caveat behind this is thinking about how this work connects to how you're looking at boys and men of color, not just from a deficit approach, but then also from an asset-based approach. And so I want to just highlight, one gentleman, Travian Shorter from BME, is really looking at this and really focusing on his work and efforts around making sure that black men and boys are seen from an asset-based approach. And so how are you all doing that, not just for black men and boys, but also boys and men of color as a whole? And then the last one is thinking about sustaining a local infrastructure or coordinating infrastructure. And so this is something that, even as a president transitions, there is this need to really think solidly about what are the sustainable structures out there and where can this work be placed in order to kind of make sure that it continues on beyond whether policy change or whether policy priorities change, whether administrations changed locally. How do we continue this work? And so just as a little plug, our December 7th workshop will be focused purely on this idea of sustaining the work and what are the structures that are there. And so a good example of some of that work that we've seen is the city of Milwaukee and them creating their Black Male Achievement Advisory Council. That is actually a structure that was passed by the council, by the city council, in order to make it a body that will coordinate not just the Black Male Achievement work, but also the MBK work as well. And so funding as well is also being passed through that structure. And so these are the things that we want to think about as we talk about implementing or a roadmap to implementing successful outcomes. And so I just kind of wanted to share quickly just the original cities that we worked with. And so as you can see, Charlottesville and Louisville are here today, and we're excited to have them along with Albuquerque, New Mexico on this call. So these are just some of the cities that we worked with. And then the last thing I kind of want to just be able to share with you, the second to the last slide that I want to share with you, is this idea around some of the lessons learned and understanding that as we've done this work, we've tried to make sure that we've pulled and gleaned out the best practices or the things that we've seen other cities either struggle with or excel in. And so we want to just be able to share those with you. So the first one is leading with data and understanding that when we talk about data, we're not just talking about youth, but also how do we break down that data by race, ethnicity, gender, and the unique one, if you can add it in there as well as a city leader, is geography. Understanding the importance of it's not just thinking about it from the standpoint of a target population, but then also if you can actually be able to identify geography, right? So now you're thinking about a place-based strategy to help improve outcomes for boys and men of color within a certain area. That helps to make sure that even with limited resources, you're able to target that population or that area and make sure you get the greatest impact out of the resources and work that you're doing. The other thing is thinking about this racial equity work within systems, and so systems and policy. How are you all creating a space? How are you all creating a space to make sure that you're asking the questions of who's benefiting, who's burdening from the policies and procedures and practices that are happening at a city level? I think the one thing that we sometimes, some cities fail to realize or fail to really acknowledge sometimes is this idea that there are programs that are happening in the community and that the city could be also running, but then also there are spaces that city and local elected officials really take on, and it's that idea of the racial equity work as far as systems work and policy work. So how are you all taking that on, and how are you all looking at that? That's one of the lessons learned in there. The third one is looking at how you're engaging boys and men of colors as partners. And this is one of, I was in a recent conversation with a number of people who were in this field. And one of the things we really wanted to highlight is this part around making sure that they're not just, youth aren't just a voice, but also are partners in this work. And that means that they have the ability to help plan and execute the strategies that are really focused on improving outcomes for them. And so how are you bringing them into the room? How are you giving them some authority in order to be able to help mold and make that? So the next one is talk about sustainability from the beginning. And so specifically, we don't want to wait until the end in order to begin thinking about, well, how do we sustain this work? Where do we put in structures? We want to start thinking about this from the beginning. And so cities that have taken on this work, that have decided to say, hey, you know what, I want to pursue this, we want them to be able to say, okay, well, as you are beginning to think about this work and continuing to think about this work, how are you thinking about where this work will reside afterward? The fifth one is thinking around this idea of leveraging city leadership. And so we're fortunate today, to have having local elected officials from the city of Charlottesville and the city of Albuquerque to really speak on how they are leading in this work, and then also city staff that help to support to make sure that ultimately, as local elected officials, you all as local elected officials are leading in this work, you're also being able to have the time and energy to be able to implement the work as well. And then the final one is thinking around this idea of system and policy changes. And so as I kind of alluded to this, the idea of as a city official, local elected official, as city staff, you all have a very unique position in understanding that there are practices and policies that are put in place within the systems itself that continually perpetuate the disparities that we see on the ground as far as impacting boys and men of color. So as you all think about your leadership and what your roles are, how can you take this work on, not from just a program, not just from a program position, but also from a policy and legislative and practice position as well? And so, one of the things that I kind of just want to show you quickly is I feel like one of the things that we've seen is that this equation for successful BMOC outcomes is to focus primarily on programs. And I think that is the go-to, and it's a natural space to be. And we believe that, and so it is believed that if you focus on programs, then what it will equal is actual outcomes for boys and men of color. And that is a success, but you're missing part of the piece. So what we believe here is really important, and we want to emphasize, is that it's practices and policies that are put in place, plus programs which equal successful outcomes for boys and men of color. And so we just want to make sure that's a highlight. And when we say policy and practices, we're talking about legislative actions that are taken, whether it's a resolution, an ordinance, whether it is any type of policy within that city. And then on top of that, thinking about the practices as it relates to agencies taking action internally to help change policies or practices that impact boys and men of color. And so that's what we want to just make sure we focus on. And so I'm actually very happy today to be able to really hear from the various cities that are out here that have been doing this work. And so one of the things I just kind of want to do is just, if you have any other information, please, you see my information there. But I want to go on ahead and turn it over to Rashida Abdur-Rahman to really speak to the work that the city of Louisville is doing. And so with that, without being the case, Rashid, can you hear us?
I can hear you guys just fine.
Great.
Okay. So thanks for the introduction, Timothy. It's Rashad Abdur-Rahman here in the city of Louisville. Really excited to be able to kind of talk some about some of the work that's going on, particularly from the mayor's perspective.
And so it's really good just being able to share some of the work that we're doing here in Louisville, but two, to appreciating the opportunity to learn from what other cities are doing. So that's exciting. It's probably important for me to share up front, and I'll reiterate this during the presentation, but Louisville has really articulated commitments to young men and boys of color really prior to President Obama's MBK Challenge. And Mayor Greg Fisher has worked quite a bit to elevate the importance of our city finding ways to support and change outcomes for black men and boys for many years. And this commitment really manifested in the creation of my office, among other things for us. I think that's one example of how our mayor has really kept some skin in the game, so to speak, in regard to how he can utilize the scope and the resources of his administration really to tangibly engage in efforts. So, along those lines, my office was created with the intent to improve outcomes for youth and young adults being exposed to and impacted by violence. We utilize a public health model of violence prevention to really begin understanding how it's important to focus on reducing some of these risk factors, and some of those risk factors being unemployment, school disconnection, trauma, things of that nature, primarily things that increase the likelihood that youth will engage in violent behavior. Likewise, we wanted to focus on heavily increasing protective factors, which is essentially the adverse of risk factors. So increasing youth success in school, ensuring that youth had opportunities related to employment and economic development, and then the presence of caring, supportive adults. We heard some about the emphasis on mentoring, and that's really a critical part of the strategy that we've employed here in Louisville. But ultimately, if we can mitigate some of these risk factors and increase protective factors in a tangible and sustained way, we know that we can begin to see some different outcomes. Unfortunately, we know that negative outcomes across systems are often racialized, meaning that there are disproportionate rates of young African American males who are inundated by some of the risk factors that I'm describing. So, it's really important for us to be having a conversation around what kind of decision making occurs as a result of the data that we're aware of. And unfortunately, the data in Louisville reflects much of the data that's present across the state and the nation. When it comes to young men and black boys, they are evidenced to be the most at risk of losing their lives to homicide. In our city, that's about 56% of the homicide victims in Louisville being African American. That's about 50% of homicide victims being under the age of 25, and 75% of our homicide victims being male. By far, gun violence is the primary cause of homicide in our city, comprising about 84% of the causes of death. So we do know that these preventable deaths are concentrated in northwest Louisville, and hopefully on the map you can see in the yellow highlighted area, that northwest area. These neighborhoods are primarily African American. There's a high rate of unemployment, poverty, school disparity, property vacancies, and etc. Many of those layered risk factors that I described exist in these areas. Based on what we understand about what our data is telling us in terms of demography and geography, it is clear not only where we must invest, but also with who we must be investing. Given the limited resources at all of our disposals, we've got to work smart and utilize what we have very wisely. So all of us are pretty familiar with the milestones that are associated with MBK. Mainly just really wanting to point out here how it fits within some of our broad structure. As part of our comprehensive violence prevention work, MBK exists as an opportunity to coordinate and convene efforts across the city that pertain to the support and well-being of young men and boys of color. Again, we're really talking about the outcomes for our young men and boys of color in relation to areas that we know are incredibly important. And I'm probably going to talk about this a little bit more later, but really our MBK plan exists within our broad One Love Louisville comprehensive violence reduction strategy that's focused around 5 key engagement areas. Those areas are and include a focus on community building, education, employment and economic development, health and social wellness, and juvenile and criminal justice reform. Based on much of what we've already discussed, you can see how MBK really fits with this work. So you can see here there's really a number of mayor-led initiatives that really, I think, highlight how our mayor has taken it upon himself and his administration to lead the way on some of this work. So I just want to dive into some of these efforts that you see listed here. And, not to exclude certainly a lot of the work occurring in partnership throughout the city, but, I think it's important for the purposes of our conversation today to really elevate the work that's been happening by virtue of the mayor's enterprise. So I'll just dive into a few here. If you're looking at our Metro Mentors program, this is a program that was launched in 2014 by the mayor and by my office, and it really is an internal policy that allows employees to utilize up to 2 hours a week of paid time to engage in mentoring in the community. So we really develop partnerships with mentoring organizations like Big Brothers Big Sisters. We engaged in partnership with our Jefferson County Public School District around a reading program, and with a program that we've developed in partnership with our sort of youth employment agency to really help some of those youth get connected with mentors and caring adults who could help them obtain educational or employment objectives or goals. And so the policy allows us to really directly plug in Metro employees with those agencies and facilitates a process to kind of get them going there. One of the things that we're learning quite a bit about the program is how to make some of those processes function the most effectively. So we're learning a lot, and we're really kind of revise how we get folks plugged in and connected to mentoring agencies. Certainly we want to increase some of the engagement, the participation in the program, but we know that we've got some work to do to maximize the benefit of what we're trying to accomplish here. But for folks who are interested, we're more than happy to share that policy with anyone who might be interested in implementing something similar, either in their municipalities or cities. So our Reimage program was launched in partnership with my office and our work development office as well, our youth work development office. And it really seeks to serve adults with misdemeanor charges who are really looking to turn their lives around and do something different. This work has really targeted between 100 and 150 youth who are trying to increase their ability to have a successful resume, to develop interviewing skills, to get connected to a caseworker in addition to a mentor who can really help guide that young person along that path of, in many ways, kind of starting a new life in some respects. What's really interesting about what we're doing with Reimage is that the mayor has dedicated $500,000 of city funding to sustain this program, but also to grow it. So prior we had been serving 2 neighborhoods in the city. We're expanding that to a 3rd neighborhood to increase the amount of support youth are going to have to get engaged in this program, but then also to reach more youth that we know are being impacted disproportionately by gun violence in their communities. So Coding at the Beach is a program that was established back in 2014, and its goal was really to bring coding skills and learning experiences to youth that were living in one of those geographic areas that I was talking about, where we have seen some of the higher rates of gun violence taking place. Definitely when we think about 21st century job skills that are in high demand, we know that coding is at or near the top of that list. Since 2014, about 700 people have received some free software training through the program, but I think a particular bright spot on this program is that we had a group of teens that came together in 2015 to establish their own company called Beach Technologies. And these teams have picked up a significant amount of clients through some of their efforts and are doing pretty well in that regard. So I think that's a good indicator of the possibilities of being really intentional about that kind of programming. So I know most cities have some form of a teen summer employment program, and SummerWorks is ours. It's targeted to provide summer employment for youth 16 to 21. And certainly this program is run in partnership, meaning that we do seek local businesses and employers to be part of this program. What's important is that the mayor really elevated this as a priority for his administration and increased the number of jobs that were available to youth through Louisville Metro government. What we've seen over the past several years is tremendous program growth in regard to the summer works, and then adding additional elements around helping youth define career pathways depending on what some of their interest areas are. So if you've got a youth who's got an interest in healthcare, how do we utilize some of the summer works programs to get them connected or placed into an environment where they may have an experience that relates to what their future career opportunities might be. And so again, I did talk a bit about One Love Louisville, which I think reflects that mayoral commitment to utilize resources to make sure that this works moving forward. What I really want to point out is that not only has the mayor sustained that space within his administration, but that too, he remains highly engaged in that space and has really elevated our relationships with national organizations that are doing similar work, particularly around Black male achievement, like the National League of Cities, like Cities United, like the Campaign for Black Male Achievement. But in addition to that, we've been the home for the Rumble Young Man Rumble event, which is sponsored by the Campaign for Black Male Achievement, and is the national convening of Black male achievement practitioners here in Louisville. As a city and as a mayor, the mayor has really embraced this CBMA designation that Louisville is the epicenter of Black male achievement. It takes that very, very seriously. So again, just these different spaces where the mayor has elevated the narrative around what our city is about and how we're going to do work and demonstrate our commitment in that space. Finally, just thinking about some of the challenges and opportunities that exist in this work that I know that everyone is really familiar with. One thing I really wanted to point out, though, is that Louisville is part of a Living Cities cohort that's really looking at how city governments implement a racial equity lens to policy and practice and essentially decision-making across the board. And so Louisville is part of that cohort. The mayor, again, has really kind of elevated that as a critically important space for us to lean in to be having those conversations as a city government, but then also to be employing some of these critical lenses that will help us to make decisions that will reduce and ideally eliminate how outcomes have been racialized and continue to be in many respects. So that's about all I got.
Great. Thank you very much, Rashad. I think one of the key things is, the city of Louisville has been doing this work for a while, and ultimately, to be named the epicenter for Black male achievement is definitely a space that Mayor Fisher has taken on. And I think as we think about mayoral leadership in this space and local elected official leadership in this space, the impact of having them at the forefront and helping the community to understand why you want to focus on boys and men of color is very important. So thank you very much, Rashad, for being able to present the work that Louisville is doing. So next we have the city of Charlottesville, who's going to be up to present. And so we have Vice Mayor Wes Bellamy and also Councilwoman Kristen Sakos, who will kind of be speaking to us around the work that the city of Charlottesville has been doing. And they also have been a part of the Boys and Men of Color, Black male achievement work, and also now Boys and Men of Color work for several years. So without further ado, we'll turn it over to you all.
Thank you. This is Kristen. I'm going to, go ahead.
I was going to say thank you all so much for having us. This is Vice Mayor Wes Bellamy. I also want to make note that we have our co-chair of our Black Male Achievement, Mr. Sarad Davenport, on the call also.
All right, great. So I'm going to start out a little bit. I'm going to introduce Mr. Davenport, who is also the director of our local place-based Promise neighborhood, City of Promise, who's been working on this along with us for for several years now. But I just wanted to start with a little bit about who Charlottesville is. We're sort of running with the big dogs on this webinar. Charlottesville only has about 48,000 people. If you can go to the next slide, the population in Charlottesville, is about 65% white, about a little under 20% black, and a lot of communities say, why do we need to do this kind of work? The cities like, Chicago and places like that where people are dying, it's a little clearer to some folks. But I think Charlottesville is a really good illustration of how every city needs to look at this work. And we are a city that is, relatively small. Although if you look at our school data, about 54% of the kids in our city schools are in some sort of economic stress, compared to only 26% in the city. So, it's particularly among our young people that we see some of these issues. The work that we're doing in Charlottesville started in about 2013, I guess, when the National League of Cities first started looking at this work. And we have been feeding from all of the different troughs of the Black Male Achievement, of My Brother's Keeper, of Cities United. And I think in Charlottesville, because we are so small, it's often the same people doing these things. And so we've been less aware of the divisions between those particular streams than other places have. For us, we've formed locally the Alliance for Black Male Achievement. And that's, we sort of take from anywhere we can get it. One of the disadvantages to being so small is that we haven't been able to have the kind of staff support that some of the larger cities are able to sort of absorb, and we're struggling with it now, and Mr. Bellamy will talk about that a little more at the end. But I just wanted to next go to our next slide, which is the impact map, and have Mr. Davenport talk a little bit about how we arrived at this and how it guides our policy. Sarat, are you unmuted?
Okay, I just got unmuted. I'm just going to talk a little bit about the impact map. The impact map, many of you have seen logic models before in Charlottesville with the Promised Neighborhood. Our program evaluator came up with the term impact map, and we've been using that more to connect policy to practice and implementation here in Charlottesville. So we decided to again use this model for Black Male Achievement and My Brother's Keeper here in Charlottesville. One of the reasons why the impact map was created was so that we can really get an idea of how we were going to move from large-scale macro policy shifts to like program implementation, and then how those activities would be used as solutions to create the outcomes that we were looking for. And we needed to get that in a format where everybody can see it, such that we can have data-informed action, and that we can measure it, and that we can continue to shape policy with quantitative and qualitative analysis. But we really needed these buckets and these ways of looking at activities that lead to outcomes, to make sure that we have a way to shape policy and shape programming activities, and we can measure it over time longitudinally to see if we're really making a difference over time. I'm one that's a big proponent of making sure that we start with the end in mind, and that we create solutions that work towards the end that we are looking for, and measure ourselves along the way. So I won't take up too much time, but that is the reason for the impact map. I won't go through each and every part of it because you can see it yourself, but that is how it came about. And I think it's really helped us to chart our work and to really move forward with some consensus, and it has invigorated the collaboration because we all understand the bigger picture and the steps forward with the map. So that's my input. Thank you.
Thanks. So I was just sort of referring back a little bit, if we can go to the next slide if you want, but going back to Timothy's roadmap with the shared vision, the impact map for us is sort of our shared vision. It's what we all look at to say, these are the things that we're looking at, some of the indicators that we want to move forward, and then we can talk about what policies it takes for us to get there. The second piece of that is the shared stakeholders, the engaging the stakeholders, which is on the next slide, I believe. So I'm waiting for the next slide.
It's there. It's up. It's up, Kristen.
Oh, somehow it's not on my screen. Okay, thank you. I'll just believe you. So the community partners that we've brought together for this, we've everything from organizations that were already specifically targeting work with young black men in the community, like 100 Black Men, to other organizations that either work with youth or with leadership in the community. The City of Promise, of course, is a place-based initiative that really looks at the well-being and outcomes of all of the youth and families in a particular neighborhood. That neighborhood is overwhelmingly African American, so that was one place we could look at that sort of place-based approach. But we've also brought in religious organizations, Abundant Life Ministries. We've brought in some of the activities after school programs that kids find that are evidence-based and that are actually showing good outcomes for children, like Computers for Kids and Boys and Girls Club. Looking at some reentry organizations. OAR is Office of, oh, now I've forgotten what it stands for. It's basically a reentry organization that we have in our community for helping people when they come out of prison. And then our Charlottesville Youth Council is another organization that is active in some of this work. And so as we bring together all of these different folks, it not only looks at the policy within our city government, which is, of course, what Mr. Bellamy and I are kind of focusing on for purposes especially of this webinar, but also looking at how different organizations look at their own work. And so we've done a lot of kind of helping groups look at what they do and what the impact of that is. We had an issue with our Big Brothers Big Sisters, for instance, where they were having a difficult time keeping black male mentors and have been doing a fair amount of kind of internal analysis to figure out what that was and what's going on there and how we can do a better job as a community at all the different levels. So I'm going to leave that, and the next pieces of this roadmap we talked about, or that Timothy talked about, were defining strategies using data, building infrastructure, and that is what I'm going to leave to my colleague, Mr. Bellamy, and I'm going to put myself back on mute.
Thank you, Kristen. Thank you, Sarad. And once again, thanks everyone for having us on the call today. So I'm going to be talking a little bit about how we move this work forward as policy. One interesting part about the city of Charlottesville is that initially when we came in and we first started doing this work, while Sarad and I were kind of the ones pushing and going to the conferences, Kristen was the individual on the policy side, and she was on council. And this work has also kind of led to individuals like myself running for city council and then being elected. So now we have more allies. So as you hear the national narrative about us becoming us being black males becoming policymakers so that we can change the narrative, that's essentially what has happened. So when you look at the identifying disparities through data slide, and you look at the sheet on the left-hand side, where this essentially is an investigative detention form, and through policy, we've been able to work with our new police chief, who is also the first African-American police chief in our city's history, to detail and write out all of our investigative detentions or stops. For some cities, they may call this quote-unquote stop and frisk. We call them investigative detentions because we're trying to get rid of the negative connotation. But whenever we do have individuals who are stopped for whatever reason, a policy procedure that is now put in place is that they all must fill out these very detailed forms. So on the forms, they have to include exactly why it was stopped, what was the action that took place afterwards, and several other items that belong on the sheet. And at any time, if any officer what the information that they fill out is not to our liking, then subsequently we being the police, I'm not a police officer, but the police chief and his staff can then send it back, and they're required to go through more training and even if need be, retraining. So that's something that we've been able to do, specifically working with our police and our community. And as you can see from the data, the figures, African Americans, and if you dig down a little bit more, African American males are the ones who are being stopped the most. So this is kind of how we changed the bar there. If you could please go to the next slide. The next slide, as you see, here's an article from one of our local newspapers, the CVO Weekly. Bellamy calls on local black males. So in our attempt to continue to push not only BMA forward, BMA being Black Male Achievement, and My Brother's Keeper, we've called 3 town halls. So Sarad and I serve as the co-chairs for Black Male Achievement, and we hosted these town hall meetings. Each town hall meeting, we had upwards of about 60 African-American males from the community come out, and we provided action plans for what we needed to do moving forward. So it was a 3-pronged approach. One approach being that we begin school visits so that we can go encourage the young children when they're coming into school. So many of you have probably seen guys across the country high-fiving kids when they come into school. Well, we now have a cohort of guys who do that the first Monday of every month at a different local school, and that was the first approach. The second approach was then asking our different brothers to be included politically and sign up for different teams and task force. So we asked for different brothers to sign up to attend our city council meetings, our city school board meetings, our county school board meetings, and then our county board of supervisor meetings, placed in different teams. They know when they're supposed to go, and then they have their topics to speak on concerning black males while they're there. And then lastly is an approach in which we just kicked off a couple of 2 months ago now, BMA, My Brother's Keeper, for black males 17 through 29, in which we're hooking up brothers, specifically African-American males, with a 2-track approach. So we have tech companies, because Charlottesville is becoming a tech hub. We have different computer technology companies and app developers coming in and actually teaching our brothers how to do computer programming coding, and that's on one track. And then for the brothers who choose not to go down that track, they can go down a skills trade track where we partner with our local community college as well as several other employers in the area, and subsequently they have agreed to train these brothers, and the hope is at the end we'll provide them with job placement. We're in the process of working that all out right now. So that program has been going up now for about 2 months. We include a stipend for the brothers at the end of every month. We've seen not only an improvement in their willingness to become employed, but also during the first hour of those meetings, we do some social training and social communication where we talk about the things that are going on from a social and emotional perspective. If you could move on to the next slide, please. So as you see, using our leverage as elected officials, and you look at these 2 pictures, one group of young African-American males through the 100 Black Men, in which we took through an etiquette training to teach them about fine dining and things of that nature. And then you look on the right, a picture of an African-American young male swimming. So a couple of things that we've been able to do, Kristen and myself as local electeds, and then Sarad and community members continuing to push the bar, is that we've been able to say, hey, we need specific policy, and not just policy, but resources placed into black males, specifically looking at black males in order for us to change how things are around here. So we've been able to initially put in a $10,000, I wouldn't call it a grant, but we have a $10,000 budget for My Brother's Keeper, or BMA, however you want to call it. And then we also were able to change the policy in terms of how department heads treat and interact with our young people. So when you look at the picture on the right, Kristen Sakos was extremely influential in kind of getting a scholarship program, because one of the things that we had continued to hear was that black boys and kids of color weren't going to the swimming pool, and there's a swimming pool in our local community that a lot of us wasn't going to. So we've been able to provide a scholarship program for that. Sarad has been very, very key in kind of picking up the tab in some of those things through City of Promise, but we also have let our department heads know that, hey, we need to make sure that we're doing everything that we can to ensure that these young people are treated from an equitable manner. and that we are indeed watching. We've let our colleagues on City Council also know just how important this is to us while we're at the City Council meetings. Just at our last City Council meeting 2 weeks ago, we were talking about how we're trying to change the narrative and the need to do certain things, but in order for us to do this, this needs to be a full-time position, so let's make sure we put it in the budget for the upcoming year. It seemed to be receptive to a certain extent, and now we just have to continue pushing forward. So that's where we are from a local elected official using our leverage to improve the livelihood of Black males in the city of Charlottesville.
Great. Thank you very much again, you all, in the work that you all are doing, especially understanding that you all are a smaller city, but I like to always say small but mighty. So thank you very much for really speaking to that. I think we're going to go ahead and transition to our last set of speakers, at least our last city for this webinar. And so I want to just go ahead and introduce Mayor Richard Berry from the city of Albuquerque, New Mexico, and then also Frank Mirabal as well, who also is from the city of Albuquerque, New Mexico.
Can you hear us okay?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. Okay, I'm sorry. I just needed some affirmation there. Sorry about that. So this is Mayor Berry. I'm here with Frank Mirabal. Couple of things I'd like to start off with is really appreciate as a mayor the work that's being done around the country on this. I was in Miami the last couple of days with 30 or so mayors through the Bloomberg initiatives. Mayor Fisher, who's one of my good friends, was there. I think a lot of the work that he's doing in Louisville. The mayor of Oakland and I had a meeting yesterday where we were talking about MBK issues, and I learned a lot from her about what they're doing. So these convenings are really important, because if we just try to do this work in a vacuum, we're not going to maximize our opportunity here. So just appreciate the convenings. Let me just give you some background on what we're doing on Albuquerque, and then I'm going to have Frank walk you through some of the details. But first of all, in New Mexico, we're the 32nd largest city in the country. We are on slide 1 here. I might give you some information on us demographically. We are a minority-majority city. New Mexico actually is 46% Hispanic, and so that puts us in a place where, and Albuquerque is actually a minority-majority city as well. So we feel like we're in a place of opportunity here where we can work on issues and challenges and create these, make opportunities where we find them, and show other cities around the nation what we're doing here that will really be effective moving forward as the country goes into, as the racial makeup of America goes. We have some challenges here, obviously, with graduation rates. We have some challenges with unemployment rates. This is not a story that is unique to Albuquerque. In fact, most mayors I talk to around the country are facing the same thing. So let me just start off with a couple of overarching ideas here. First of all, when the president and his team invited me personally to the White House for the announcement of Brothers Keeper, I went. I was one of the few mayors that were in the room at the time, and came home and started this conversation locally. And a couple of things that have really struck me is, number one, young men of color are ready for this discussion. They've been ready for a long time. We did not have to push them into this conversation. In fact, in many ways around the country, they had to pull us in. And so we look at it from the standpoint of these young men and boys of color are really in the leadership position driving this discussion here. If you look at the next slide, in addition to some of the things that we are doing in Albuquerque to focus on equity, I think a couple of things have really impacted me as a mayor as we've gone through this process. First of all, there's 3 main, maybe 4 main things that we need to concentrate on here in Albuquerque, and maybe other folks around the country would recognize this as well. First of all, it is opportunity. There are opportunity gaps. We have young men of color who can and want to do interesting things that are different than they're doing today. They don't have the opportunity. Number 2, they want to be held accountable. Accountability is a big part of this equation. And if we go in as local governments and just try to teach young men of color what our paradigm is here, we are going to fail. They want that accountability measure. And then the third thing is we want to make sure that our policies, our procedures in our communities aren't gaming the system against young men of color. So opportunity, accountability, and making sure the system is equitable, I think, are really important. And then every day I work on this, it becomes more and more apparent that expectations matter. Aligning our expectations between our community, young men of color, the MBK movement that we have, and that could be everything from social expectations to, what do you do in certain circumstances in your community. And that's a discussion between our police department, young men of color, our school system, young men of color, our justice system, young men of color. And I think a lot of the great work that we're going to get done out of this is aligning these expectations. And so on this slide, we talk about race equity here, focusing on equitable procurement practices. We are going through the city of Albuquerque, department by department. We're going to find out, as a lot of the cities have talked about, data does matter. Where can we find, through the research and study of data, where these pockets of inequity are, and how can we use that data to take limited resources that we all have and make the biggest possible impact? So we're doing that. We feel that immigration and refugee affairs is important in the city of Albuquerque. We have a new office we're developing in that regard. We are focusing on promoting entrepreneurship, not just in immigrant communities, but also in our community as a whole, and that's making a difference. We're working on pay equity issues from the gender standpoint. All of these things actually tie into the work that we're doing on Brothers Keeper. So if you flip to the next slide, there's a little bit of a time frame about what the city of Albuquerque has done. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on that. You can read that in the future. It just kind of is an accounting of what we have done. If you want to flip to our guiding principles slide, I think that's where we get into the meat of what we're doing. Like so many cities, data matters. Getting a collective and sustainable commitment from our community, including how this survives. I'm self-term limited, so I've got 1 year left as a mayor. What do we do with this initiative so that the next mayor, whoever he or she is, can launch off of the work that we've done? If they aren't as passionate as we are, how can it survive? If they can take it 5 steps beyond what we have, how do we set them up for that success? We're spending a lot of time on that. And most importantly, how do we empower the youth in our community, and young men of color in particular, and men and boys of color, to tell us and coach us up? I'm an old student athlete, so I always go back to the athletic metaphors, but how can we let the community, young men of color, coach me as a mayor, coach our administration, coach our city on what that looks like? If you flip to the next slide, this is where we get into this. We hear so often is career exploration, it's skill development. We do a lot of things in Albuquerque with industry taught curriculum in our high schools through Running Start for Careers, where we have industry teach everything. We've got 8 or 9 programs now, from construction to filmmaking to hospitality, banking industry, medical sciences, laboratory sciences, nursing, lots of different things to try to help connect the dots for our community, so that these kids understand why their schoolwork matters to them. We've heard loud and clear that school discipline, going back to those basic premises I said early on, let's make sure that the system's not gamed intentionally or unintentionally against young men of color. I thought that the mayor of Oakland yesterday has a great program where she went in, worked with the school district to kind of rewrite why young men of color were being suspended. They've undone this definition of, I'll get the name wrong, but willful misconduct, or whatever they called it, this vague category that was driving a lot of this in their schools. So they really worked and used their bully pulpit to force that. I'm going to take that idea, bring it to Albuquerque on top of the other things that you're seeing here. I love what you're doing in Louisville with the 2 hours of mentorship. So that's something that we can plug and play. But the school discipline, I think, does matter. And that's where I think mentorship matters so much, is in the middle schools, in the elementary schools, in the high schools. Third, we're going to be, we're working on family and community engagement. We have a program called Homework Diner, here that's been a great program where we just bring families together in the school once a week, make sure we take the food insecurity situation off the table, get a meal for the family. We ask the young person to be the leader in this equation. Bring your family to the table. We're going to do our homework together. Whoever's raising you is going to be there to do the homework with you, mom, dad, aunt, uncle, grandpa, grandma, whoever it is. You have to bring them with you. We're going to take the mystery out of this for everybody. And then, you know, we just really moved the metric on tardiness, homework getting done, absenteeism, lots of different things. But we recognize that the family is really important here. And then, of course, we're trying to work on justice reform. And, you know, not just, you know, public safety is important, but we also want to make sure that we're giving folks opportunities to break that cycle. We are not where we want to be yet, but I think that we can get there. And we've made some big progress, but I think as the justice reform movement comes through our communities around America, we can really launch off My Brother's Keeper and use that as a tool and a training mechanism and a voice to impact that discussion so that we don't do what happens so often with policy where we overswing and too many folks are in jail, and then we underswing and folks are getting out of jail without the requisite skills that they need to succeed, so they end up back in jail. You know, how can we use this to break that cycle? It's exciting work for a mayor. I am just so humbled to be a part of this in Albuquerque, and the more we talk about this, even today, you know, I've written down 10 things that you've talked about today that I think we can add. And I'm just going to leave it with this, and I'm going to turn it over to Frank Mirabal. You're not going to be able to do this if you're not intentional in your city. This is not a one-off kind of a deal. You have to put resources and time. I think it resides in the mayor's office. I think it has to be that important, and that's where it resides in Albuquerque. You have to bring someone in. Frank Mirabal's a PhD. He's my data guy, but he's also my connector to the community. He comes from a place where he can have discussions in our community that maybe I couldn't have as the mayor. And so I expect him to come into my office and tell me where we're hitting it and where we're missing it, to give me the unvarnished version of what he's seen out in the community. And then my job is to listen and learn as a mayor. And then once we get dialed in on the things that we think are going to make a difference, then we roll up our sleeves, and then I can get to work making sure the resources are going where they need to go, making sure that some of the stubbornness of systems gets broken down, and then we can you know, try things, and then have the political will to try things, and have the political will to have uncomfortable discussions and look at uncomfortable data points in our city, so that we, you know, bring the right people to the table. And this is where I'll leave it. Frank will take you down the road of some of the things we're doing specifically, but it's so important that civic leadership, whether it's the faith community, whether it's the activist community, or whether it's young men of color, you know, the men and boys of color, you know, that the community has to help your mayors. And we have to get to this place, and we are in Albuquerque, I believe, and I believe in other cities as well, where when we start putting this uncomfortable data out, this data that doesn't really mesh up to some people's ideas of how things have been going, because they haven't been going where we want them to go for a long time in a lot of areas, that civic community uses that data to bolster the conversation rather than get into these, you know, moments where the data detracts from the conversation. And then if we don't use the data to move the conversation, then hold us accountable, because everybody has to be held accountable. So with that, I'm going to have Frank run you through some more specifics in Albuquerque, and then of course, like always, inundate us here with your data from your cities, because we can learn from that even though it's outside of the city limits here. Inform us on what we're doing well, what we can do to add value, and together we don't have to have every mayor reinventing this in every city. We can be specific to our cities, but there's so much common ground here that I think we can really share these best practices around the country. Frank?
Great. So this is Frank. If we can go to the next slide, please. So I'll get a little bit more in depth in terms of the work that's happening on the ground and how we're going to execute on this particular plan. So as you can see, is one of our core recommendations is around career exploration. When we had our Youth Action Summit, we had over 200 young people from throughout our city attend, and we heard loud and clear from them, we need help preparing for college, we need help preparing for careers, and ultimately we need help getting connected to employers in our community. So this milestone was informed primarily by young people. So a few things that we're doing around career exploration, like Mayor articulated early in the conversation, we have a dual credit program in partnership with Albuquerque Public Schools and Central New Mexico Community College, where folks can get dual credit, college level credit for classes that are industry taught by industry professionals. Very exciting work. We've been on this trajectory now for several years. We've also created an app that is really robust that we call Launch Me ABQ. And this app, really what it does is connects young people to volunteerism opportunities. It gives them the opportunity to skill up when it comes to careers. And then more importantly, they can earn digital badges for the work that they've completed that can be put on their resume and that they can share with employers. So we're really excited about this career exploration work. We also have a community partner in Mission Graduate. So for those of you on the call that are familiar with the Strive Together network, they are our local Strive Together partner. And basically what they've done is they started a conversation to learn a little bit more in terms of what's available to young people in our community around career exploration. So anything from internships to apprenticeships to externships to even job shadowing opportunities. And what they found through their mapping activity was that there were 30,000 career exploration opportunities in our city. And so that everything from low touch and low intensity job fairs and career fairs to higher intensity internships, service learning, apprenticeships. So now our work becomes connecting young men of color to these opportunities that exist in our community. Next slide, please. As Mayor articulated earlier as well, we understand that we have to disrupt the school-to-prison pipeline, and a lot of this work is being done nationally. So we are right now in the process of working with Albuquerque Public Schools on looking at alternative forms of discipline and how can we create environments within schools where we can access behavioral health, mental health support for those that are in need instead of disciplining young men of color disproportionately compared to their peers and kicking them out of school. As you can see, this connects to MBK Milestone 3, graduating high school ready for college and careers. So from a policy level, we want to end zero tolerance policies, but we also want to look at some of the policies that exist within our school system that are pushing young men of color out of schools as opposed to engaging them in meaningful ways. So right now we are in the process of really fleshing out this particular recommendation in partnership with Albuquerque Public Schools. Next slide, please. Family and community engagement. We feel like we can be much more successful when the family is involved at all levels of our work. And so we have some examples in our community where young people are getting tutoring support while their families are in ESL classes, GED classes, because if we focus on the family holistically, we feel like we're going to achieve much greater outcomes. So there's a number of things that we're doing in partnership with our local school district that you can see listed here on the slide that gets to that level of family engagement that we're hoping for. Next slide, please. So the final recommendation is around reform practices to our juvenile justice system. Again, how do we disrupt that school-to-prison pipeline so we can engage young men of color in a much more meaningful way and get them on a greater trajectory towards success? Next slide. So how do we do this work? Obviously, we can only go so far as a city government in terms of how we execute on our plans, so we need very well-developed, clearly defined partnerships with community-based organizations. We like to partner with networks that already are engaging the community on some of these issue areas. So you can see with our governance structure, so the MBK Executive Director is essentially me. I'm leading this work on behalf of Mayor Berry and on behalf of our office. But our work is really guided by an advisory council, which is made up with a number of different community leaders representing the Latino community, the African American community, the Native American community, and folks that are representing college and career readiness, doing some work around career exploration, and all of our focus areas. So then in terms of the distributive work and how we get this work done, we have put together 4 community action teams that are co-chaired by somebody representing a major system. So in the case of career exploration, I co-chair that work group with Angelo Gonzalez from Mission Graduate. School discipline has a co-leadership structure as well with a representative from Albuquerque Public Schools and a community partner, as do the other 2 quadrants. So really, you know, there's been discussion on this particular webinar around sustainability. So we want to ensure that we have our anchor institutions involved in this work. That way it gets carried on well beyond this mayoral administration. So that's why we've been very intentional about having a very strong public-private partnership in terms of how we execute this work. So a couple of final thoughts before I end. Again, it is super important for us to be data informed in all of our work. We went through a policy review process with the Center for Educational Policy Research at the University of New Mexico, and we were able to understand the nuance of the problem. So disaggregated data is super important to us. We want to know how our policies, programs, partnerships are impacting young men of color, what quadrants of the city are most impacted, all of those things that we can gain from being data informed. We also want to understand better if we're lifting up strategies, are they evidence-based? Do we have evidence to suggest that they're working? And number 2, are they scalable? And so those are things that we definitely are looking at when we're doing our data review. So with that, that's all I have. I guess I'll turn it back over to our moderator.
Awesome. Thank you very much again, Frank and Mayor Barry, for speaking for the city of Albuquerque. One of the things I would just really note is, and I'm happy you kind of hit on this idea around structures. The question that we got actually from a panelist was specifically around what are some examples of governance structures and what are some of the key organizations that are involved. So I'm kind of happy that you kind of hit on that. And I know that the city of Charlottesville and the city of Louisville as well can speak to that. But I think the one thing, if you can speak to that, that'll be great. But then I think the other thing I really want to harp on in this question is thinking about how to start the policy conversation. And so what are some of the best practices that potentially you all have found helpful in being able to, whether it's bringing the right people to the table, whether it's thinking about pulling out data, what are some of the best practices that you all can kind of share around having, at least initiating this type of policy conversation?
This is Kristen. Can you hear me?
I think you're muted.
Am I on?
Yes, we've got everybody on now. So, but I heard Kristen first actually. So why don't we go ahead?
Yeah, I was just going to say that one thing that we've done a lot in this community is kind of getting over the barrier of people not realizing that it's a problem because it doesn't affect them. And so I think a lot of what we've done as city councilors, Wes joined the council in January, and I've been on council now for 6 years, is looking at kind of who makes the decisions and what motivates them, who do they listen to, and then making sure that we go talk to those folks and build political will in the community. You know, us elected officials, we're leaders, but we also respond to what the community is saying. And so if we can get the community plugged in so that they're saying things about what affects them and what they care about, it helps leaders to lead effectively.
Yeah, this is Frank.
Okay, thank you, Frank.
Yeah, one of the things that I was going to add, you know, we have tremendous assets in our local community, and one is that we have, as one of our anchor institutions in our backyard, the University of New Mexico. And so when we're talking about data and we're talking about policy in particular, you know, our partnership with them, and specifically our partnership with the Center for Educational Policy Research, really helps in terms of us getting the data that we need, but then also looking at promising practices throughout the country that can help inform our work. And so if there's any, you know, suggestion, recommendation that I could possibly make, is look at some of these anchor institutions within your cities, specifically higher ed, because they can add tremendous value to your work.
Thank you. So I just want to just clarify, I just want to also just make sure, Councilwoman Sakos and Vice Mayor Bellamy, I just want to just check, you all have that, you can speak to some of the work that you all are doing with the University of Virginia as well, correct?
Yes.
Kristen, you want me to chime in a little bit?
Sure. Great.
So as far as the governance structure of the Black Male Achievement, there are persons from the psychology department, there are people from Youth Next, which is the Center for, I believe it's adolescent development at the Curry School at the University of Virginia. From the Promised Neighborhood standpoint, we've been in partnership, even before I arrived as a staff member, with the university, Youth Next, Youth Development, kind of think tank, and they've helped us with program evaluation, longitudinal data, and like we are very fortunate to have the University of Virginia right in our backyard and helpful as we do a lot of this work. And I don't know, Kristen may want to add more.
Well, I will just add that I've also been on the jail board for a long time. We have a regional jail, and we were you know, faced with the idea that we might have to build a new wing to the jail because it was so overcrowded, and instead looked as a community at evidence-based decision-making to reduce our use of the jail. And we have reduced the jail, but one of the key partners in doing that was the systems engineering department, of all things, at UVA, at the University of Virginia, where they actually looked at ways that we could build data sharing structures and look at you know, workflows and where different inmates were coming from and what were the decision points as, you know, to get them there, and how we could use diversion and other ways to keep them from being there. So sometimes those things come from kind of the non-social sciences, places that you might be surprised to find them, but there are people in the academic area in all sorts of kind of cross-pollinating fields.
Great, and I just want to just highlight another one for the city of Louisville. Rashad, do you have any insights? Can you kind of speak to maybe some of the work that's happening within the zones of hope, and potentially thinking about the collaborative work that you all are doing, not just with local agencies such as the Urban League, but then also thinking about how that's connecting to city agencies? Are you still on the call? Okay. Well, we want to at least go ahead and thank you all, for each of you, for being able to be on this call today. I just want to go over a couple of things for everyone to keep note of in the coming weeks that are going to be coming down the pipeline as far as our work. And so one of those things is actually looking at our on November 10th, the Government Alliance on Race and Equity is going to be having a convening in Atlanta, which is really going to be providing you all an understanding for how to apply a racial equity lens locally. And it's almost like a training to help cities organize around this work. And I know that that's been mentioned in several of the cities now already that were on this webinar around how they are looking at racial equity as a way to move forward within their local governments. And so that's kind of one of the things that we want to kind of highlight as well. On November 6th, we have our city summit in Pittsburgh, and so for all the local elected officials and city staff or whoever would love to come, we would love to have you. We're going to be having a racial equity training in Pittsburgh as well to help make sure that local elected officials and city staff are also connected to this work and know how to organize and mobilize around understanding how policy changes and systems need to be changed within city structures. And then the other thing is that I want to highlight as well is that on the November 17th, we will be having a follow-up conversation to these series of webinars that we've had that really focuses and allows us to get face-to-face time with you all on how to promote and how to really sustain this work around boys and men of color for the long haul. And so hopefully this will be an opportunity for you to be able to hear from other cities as well that are doing the boys and men of color work, that are thinking about and that are also thinking about how to sustain this work long term. And so we really hope that you'll be able to join us in Pittsburgh for our city summit to hear those topics and others as well. And you can see there's a register button there. When the email goes out, you'll be able to see this as well and register accordingly. And the final one that I kind of want to highlight again is this idea of understanding the sustainable infrastructures. And I'm so happy that each of the cities kind of talked about how they're trying to sustain this work, and even thinking about the city of Louisville and how they have, the city of Louisville and how, I'm sorry, the city of Albuquerque and how they have really worked to really make sure that they're sustaining this work and looking forward to the next administration. And I would imagine as well that Councilwoman Sakos and also Vice Mayor Bellamy would speak to that, and Rashad would also speak as well to how do you sustain this work. And so I think that that's just those key insights that we want to kind of bring up and lift up along this way. So with that being the case, we want to thank each and every one of you all for spending your time today listening to some of the cities that are doing this work. And we hope that you'll join us and look forward to seeing you all again on our upcoming webinar. And also, if you can, come to the City Summit in November in Pittsburgh. Thank you again and have a great day.